Hi, and thanks for listening. Before we begin, we just wanted to reassure you that if you have worked with any of our hosts or guests, that we treat your privacy with the utmost of respect. Therefore, you won't hear us divulging any confidential or identifiable details about you or your loved one in any of our episodes. Unless, of course, you would like to be featured as a guest yourself and talk about your experiences. In which case, please do get in touch with us via the contact details at the end of the show. That said, let's get on with the next episode.
Hi guys, and welcome to episode 9 of Over My Dead Poddy. And as always, I'm joined by my amazing co-host Nicola. Hi Nicola, how's things?
Hi Carl, it's all good, thank you.
Great, how's your week been?
It's been a brilliant week here. It was producer Steve's birthday yesterday. So we had lots of cuddles from our 8-week-old granddaughter, lots of Guinness and chocolate cake, and maybe a glass or two of wine.
Absolutely unbelievable. So happy birthday, Steve. So for me, the week has been quite busy as well. I was unfortunately been very busy with work, but also my mayoral duties. We had the first fruit ceremony in the town centre, which is always good fun. So yeah, no, that was all good, all good. Right, so let's get on with the episode. So for this week, we're going to be talking about how to create a killer eulogy. So for me as a funeral director, I of course come in to see families and discuss pretty much everything from start to finish with families. And creating a killer eulogy really isn't my forte. So, Nicola, this is over to you. Where do we begin?
Oh my word, no pressure then. And it's a really strange dynamic between an officiant and a funeral director, because we write the story, hear about somebody's life, but maybe don't even see any photographs sometimes until the day of the service, whereas the funeral director will have seen the person, but not necessarily known their story. So it's a coming together on the day of kind of the story and the person. I think one of the main reasons I wanted to start this podcast was because I so often heard families say, I just don't know what we're going to tell you about our loved one. We've just got nothing to say, nothing to tell you. And then you come away an hour and a half later with pages and pages of notes, because you'll find this, Carl, there's always a story to tell from everybody's life.
There is, yeah, there is indeed. And again, I mean, we do get asked questions as funeral directors and where to begin, but obviously we always say, oh, look, it's probably best speaking to your celebrant, your minister or your vicar, because obviously they're, more experienced than us as such. But obviously there's all these different makeups on how to create this eulogy or this sort of description, whether you do things in chronological order or do you just fire things out at random, or good stories, bad stories. And just for me, I would just always say, let's include everything. Let's go for the lot.
Absolutely spot on, all of the above. We might want to just start by saying, let's try and get rid of the word eulogy, because I've heard urology, eulogist, I've heard so many variations of that word, and it's really confusing. Even I don't really know what it means.
I still struggle to spell it.
I struggle to say it. So I tend to just say to a family, let's just write the story of your loved one's life in the way that you would like it to be told. So there's probably, if I'm making a call to a family and saying, let's arrange to meet, and they ask me, what are the things we need to think about? There's probably 5 areas that I think are really good starting points that hopefully bring a little bit of inspiration. So firstly, that kind of timeline of significant events. So when were they born? Where were they born? Who were their parents? Who were their siblings? What did they do for their first job? What did they do in their spare time? When did they get married? When were their children born? Those kind of big life moments. And that might sound really, really boring if we just reel that off as a list in a service, and you'd be dead right. But it just gives me or any officiant a skeleton of somebody's life. We can, in our head, start to think about, okay, where did their life lead? Where did they spend their time? What are the other questions I want to ask? So, Carl, when you mentioned about do we write it chronologically, it's a really interesting debate, because at celebrant school, you're certainly taught not to write a eulogy chronologically. And if there are other ways of doing it that make it more interesting, we'll find them. But actually, quite often for families, that's the way they would want the story to be written, because that's how it makes sense to them. That's how they lived it with their loved one.
I think, yeah, I would agree. A lot of families do, and it sort of has that particular order and that, you know, that running order as such for a service. But you also have to be mindful that we're not just sat reading out somebody's CV, because that basically is it. And as you say, it's the skeleton of the service. Then we need to dig deeper and find out who that person is, what they enjoyed, what they didn't like, all that sort of stuff.
Perfect, absolutely. And that leads me on to the second thing that I would suggest families start to think about, which is the passions, the hobbies, the interests of their loved one. When they were absolutely at their happiest in their life, what is it they would be doing? So, Carl, if we were writing your eulogy and I said to you, what is it that you're doing when you're absolutely at your happiest? Life could not get any better.
Yeah, so I mean that's a great question, and there's lots of things in my life that really, you know, keep me ticking. So obviously the family to start, I've got to start there, haven't you? You've got to start with the family, of course. But I think there's nothing better for me than getting out on the golf course. Even though golf is quite a frustrating game, it's 4 hours. It's a 4-hour walk, and the golf just sort of spoils it really. But it's a great place to be. I used to be quite big into cycling as well, so I did lots of different hobbies and just getting out there, and also just hanging out with my mates and just having a good time with the lads. That's nice and simple. I'm a simple lad, really.
But that's absolutely how we start to put the colour around that skeleton, or dare I say it, that's how we start to bring the skeleton to life. And it's adding those hobbies, those interests, those things that really gave your loved one so much pleasure. And actually, probably where we start to get some of the little anecdotes. So I'm sure, Carl, you might not want to reveal them here, but there are 1 or 2 golfing holiday stories that we could tell at your funeral that would make people laugh.
Yes, quite possibly. Yeah, we may save that for another episode, I think.
Is that no comment?
No comment, thank you.
So definitely start to pull out those anecdotes. So we've got a timeline, we've got the passions and the hobbies and the interests, but actually that's about what somebody did. And what we really want to bring out in the story of their life is who they were as a person. So we start to move on to the values, what really mattered to them. So that might be things like fairness or justice or treatment of animals or charities they were really supportive of. But all of those things that really, really mattered for me, I think being kind is really, really important. And that, I hope whenever somebody's reading my eulogy, one of the things they'll say is, well, just Nicola was really kind. Wherever she could be, she was kind. And so it's those sort of values that come out.
I think also, Nicola, it's always good. So we are talking about those, what people would say in people's eulogies, the nice things. But of course, there are always darker moments in people's lives. So there's good points and bad points. Now, what would you recommend for the bad points? Would you say them in a service? Would you read them out?
It's such a good point to make. And we do say about the good, the bad and the ugly. And what we want a story to be is balanced and true. So we don't want to paint somebody as a saint if everybody else in the congregation is looking at each other and thinking, bloody hell, that's not the Kevin that we knew. So it has to be balanced, but also we don't have to be disrespectful and we don't have to be rude. So it's about just being honest with your officiant and trusting them to have the skills and the knowledge and the experience to write that and tell the story in a way that is authentic, but without upsetting or hurting anybody.
I think you're right. You're dead on point there, Nicola. And as a funeral director, I'm always quite intrigued as to listen to these eulogies and these life stories, because you get to meet some fantastic and incredible people throughout my career. And it is always nice to hear these stories. And the other point is the congregation. It's not made up all of just family. It's from different parts of this, the person's life. And for me, it's always quite interesting to see people's reaction when there's a story told that they didn't know about them. They say, oh, crikey, I didn't know that. And then it sets off a conversation after the service, when people go back to the reception, and it just continues the celebration, and people find out even more than what they already knew.
Absolutely. So at your funeral service, at the party afterwards, we're all going to be talking about that time you cartwheeled naked through Richmond Town Centre that nobody else knows about until we tell it at your funeral.
That's it, yeah, 100%.
But it's exactly that point where when I'm outside the crematorium at the end of a service and people come up to me and say, I never knew that, or I'd forgotten that, or I knew a little bit about it, but now I've got the full picture, that it's really reassuring that you think I've done a really, really good job. But the other thing to pick up on that is that we will only include the people in the eulogy that you ask us to. So sometimes it can be really sensitive in terms of previous partners, estranged children or parents, or so there might be people where you think, "Oh, gosh, they were part of their life. We either just want to give a mention to their name or we don't want to mention them at all." And that's absolutely fine. I'm not, nor any other officiant, are going to sit there and tell you what you have to put in. You just guide us on what you're comfortable with. In the previous episodes, we've talked about complicated family dynamics. So you tell us what you're comfortable with, and that's the story that we will tell.
And I always say that to families as well, because for me, I'm stood at the back of the service and you're at the front and everybody's staring at you. So if you're the one telling the story and you're not mentioning people's names, you're the person who gets the daggers and I'm not. I'm out the way.
Thanks for your support, Carl.
Always there.
So the final two things I think that I would advise families just to have a think about before they meet their officiant are, what did you learn from your loved one, or what have they left in the world that makes it a better place? And what were they most proud of in their life? And very often that will be their family. But I never want to presume that. But it could be something as simple as they were the best tea maker in North Yorkshire, or actually they just kept getting up every day. And it doesn't have to be rocket science. It doesn't have to be brain surgery. So don't feel that we're coming in to judge in any way, that it's not this huge, big, elaborate life. The little things are really, really important. And actually, when we lose somebody we love, it's very often the little things that become the big things. So don't get too caught up in, I don't have anything big enough to tell you about my loved one's life.
And of course, so if you are listening to this podcast, and this is the reason we've started this, is that once you've listened to it, it hopefully gives you the confidence just to go and have the conversation with mum or dad or whoever it might be, and just say, what are you proud of? What are your best moments? What are your worst moments? And then you're writing the script as you go, and you're getting it from that person firsthand. So what they tell you is the truth. So you just get on with it, and that's what you can then pass on to the to the celebrant or to your vicar.
Absolutely. And if you want to go one stage further from that and really ensure that your story is told in the way that you want it to be told, just write your own eulogy. Make sure somebody knows where that is, but you write the story of your life, or at least the skeleton, the bits that you want to be told, the things that you might want to keep in the closet, so that people know what they can tell on your funeral.
So with that in mind, Nicola, if somebody is writing their own eulogy, how do you, that's a life celebrating, or a life worth celebrating. You're looking at, let's say, an 85-year-old lady. How do you cram 85 years into a eulogy?
Into 10 minutes, which is usually about all we have for the story of someone's life. And do you know what? We can't possibly cover absolutely everything. So what I would say is pick up on the big things that were really important to their life. So if you're writing your life story, it is those moments that, what are you most proud of? Where have you felt happiest? Where do you know you might have fallen a little bit short in life? Where can you be a little bit stubborn, a little bit grumpy, so we have some humour? And don't focus too much on the detail of any one thing. It's great to bring in those themes, the different ideas, the different things that you're into, rather than telling 3 stories but in absolute minute detail. Stick to the 10 big things that you've done across your life that you've really enjoyed and what you're grateful for. I think it's, as much as in a service we'll give gratitude for your life, tell us what you're grateful for in your life too.
What about inside jokes, family inside jokes? How do they go down?
So do you know what, Carl? That's a really difficult one. And sometimes inside jokes are best left inside, unless they're really, really obvious. Because if there's a lot of explaining to do, a lot of context setting, then actually you start to lose people in that. And if it was one of those moments where you sort of had to be there, well, actually just keep it to your little group in the reception afterwards and say, oh, do you remember that time was when that was the joke? But actually, if it's something massive that everybody knew about, that everybody saw your loved one doing, that was really obvious, then yeah, let's mention that, because everybody will know about it and it's obvious. So the big ones, definitely let's include those. The smaller, more intimate ones, probably keep them between yourselves.
Yeah, I think I would agree, definitely, because as you say, some get it and some don't. For me also, for eulogies, I'm more than happy for anybody to get up and speak about their loved one. But obviously it's a funeral director's nightmare when people go off script and they go off piste. And as much as I'm encouraging people to talk about their loved ones, we also have to be mindful of the time constraints that we have at crematoriums, at burial sites, just the whole parts of the whole operation.
Absolutely. And I think one of the reasons I stick so closely to my script word for word is because I'll have written the story, the eulogy of someone's life. I'll have sent it back to the family. They'll have shared it, read it, told me what they like, told me what they don't like. We'll have shaped it, worked on it together. And I know that last version that they've seen, they're really, really happy with. So that's exactly what I'll read out on the day. No going off script for me. I just don't trust myself.
No, that's it. And I mean, nowadays, obviously, people do write a lot of scripts down and go through things over and over again, which is a real positive thing. There used to be a gentleman, he was a Catholic priest who used to go to see families, and he wouldn't write a single thing down, not a thing. And I didn't think it was true at first. When I first met him, I thought, this is going to go completely wrong. But it never did. He knew he would remember all of the family's names, he'd remember all the stories, and he would deliver a perfect eulogy from just out of his own mind. And he never got any family names wrong or anything. And it was fantastic to even just to listen to and just to watch him, craft the service together.
I think that's incredible. I have so much respect for him, and I would love to have that skill, but unfortunately I have other talents, not that one. So you'll still see me scribbling away, pen and paper in hand. And one of the other things I'd say, if you are writing your own eulogy, it's quite a subtle difference, but just think about writing to be heard versus writing to be read. So when we write for somebody to read, our brains can work much quicker than when we're listening. So really, when you're writing something that's to be read out, you need to give yourself pauses for phrasing, pauses for the congregation to keep up, and write in such a way that it's as simple as possible with a really simple sentence construction, because it is different listening to reading. And so often I see family members read something out that's written to be read, and I can see the congregation are struggling just because of the structure of how it's written. Little grammar lesson for you there, Carl.
Didn't see that curveball coming.
So Carl, we've been talking all about what makes interesting and engaging eulogies, and where they can sometimes sound a little bit like a CV. But there is nothing like an example to really show people what we mean. So we have taken the icon Marilyn Monroe and written her life story in a couple of different ways. So Carl, I'm going to ask you first of all to read out your version of Marilyn's life story.
Problem. Okay, so here we go. Marilyn Monroe, born Norma Jean Mortensen on June 1st, 1926. In Los Angeles, was an American actress, model and singer. She began her career as a model before signing a film contract in 1946. She appeared in movies such as Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, How to Marry a Millionaire, and The 7-Year Itch. She became a well-known public figure and was regarded as a major sex symbol in the 1950s. Her personal life included 3 marriages to James Dougherty, Joe DiMaggio, and Arthur Miller, all of which ended in divorce. She also experienced several health and personal difficulties. She died on August 5th, 1962 in Los Angeles, and at the age of 36 from an overdose. Despite her early death, Monroe continues to be a recognised and important cultural figure. Her image and films remain commercially successful and widely referenced in popular culture.
And no mention of John F. Kennedy at all, for libel purposes. But that gave you a good skeleton, a good outline of Marilyn and her life and what she achieved. But it's probably a little bit bland. So that gives us a really good background, the skeleton of Marilyn and what she did in her life and her career. But it's a little bit bland. So actually, what we might want to do is put a little bit more colour into that. So we might write it something like,
Marilyn Monroe was born Norma Jean Mortensen on June the 1st, 1926, in Los Angeles. Her early life was marked by instability and various foster homes. Yet from that uncertain start, she rose to become one of the most recognisable and iconic women in the world. Her working life began as a model before she signed a film contract in 1946. And soon the screen was to light up with her presence. With films like Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, How to Marry a Millionaire, and The 7-Year Itch, She captivated audiences, not only with her beauty, but with a warmth and a comedic timing that made her unforgettable. Yet behind the glamour, Marilyn was also just Norma Jean, a woman searching for belonging and her true soulmate, facing struggles with self-doubt, her health, and the ravages of fame. Her marriages to James Doherty, Joe DiMaggio, and Arthur Miller each sadly ended. Yet in all of them, she longed for the love that she so freely gave to others. Her life tragically ended far too soon, on August the 5th, 1962, at just 36. Yet her light, her smile, her voice, the fragile humanity that shone through her, remain embedded in the hearts of her fans for eternity. Marilyn Monroe was both legend and beauty, dazzling, vulnerable, unforgettable. But she taught us that sometimes even our wildest dreams, however fleeting, can outlast time itself.
So what you can hopefully see from those is two completely different tones. And actually that second one might feel a little bit too far. It might feel a bit fluffy. It might feel a little bit too wordy. And that's okay, because what your officiant will do is have worked out the right tone for the story as we go through and we talk to you. So for somebody who is very academic or a little bit more serious, we might want to write a bit more of a factual CV of their life. For somebody who was very flamboyant, a little bit quirky, a little bit eccentric, then we might want to go more on the flowery side.
And I think that's a good point to make, Nicola, because all of the celebrants who I know and who we use have that skill set and that ability to be able to judge the family, the situation, and what the family dynamic is and how they're wanting this service to come across. And I think that's a really fair point to make, definitely.
Absolutely. And any celebrant, any minister you work with will hopefully ask you the question, what tone are you looking for in this service? What do you want it to sound like? What's the story you want to tell? And just on that point, it's a little bit of a sensitive one, but sometimes I'll walk into a family and they'll say to me, we want a really, really funny service, and then not give me anything funny at all to work with. Now, I'm not a comedian, absolutely not. And some of my celebrant colleagues are hilarious and much, much better than me at writing comedy. But that's probably not my strongest point. So if you are thinking, we want a really light, funny, upbeat service because that's who he was, just telling me that your loved one was funny isn't enough for me to write a funny script. I kind of need some examples. I need some jokes. I need some of the things that he did. Otherwise, it can be a bit flat.
And I think, yes, if you do get those examples, that's really good. But the other thing to be mindful of is that what you perceive as funny isn't what I might think is funny. So it's probably best, just to try and gauge the mourners and the service itself, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I think comedy and humour more than anything is very, very personal. So what's respectful, what actually is funny to everybody else, and what doesn't kind of bring your loved one into disrepute in any way as well. We don't want to be laughing at them. We want to be laughing with them.
Fully agree, definitely.
And then the one final thing I'll always try and say to families, just to kind of wrap up the meeting that I have with them, is what are 4 or 5 adjectives that you'd use to describe your loved one? And I'll probably have picked up a lot of those during our conversations. So there probably will be things in most people like kind, selfless, thoughtful, generous, humorous, funny. So try not to think too much of those generic words. Try and describe to us in a bit more detail exactly who that person is to you, the words that come into your mind, and your celebrant and your officiant will help you with some of those words if you're struggling. Yeah, the other thing I was going to mention, Carl, was that often when we sit down, I had it this afternoon with a lady who was so gorgeous. She'd written 8 pages of notes about her lovely, lovely mum. And it didn't really come out in any order. She just kept apologising time and time again. I've got this story. Oh, sorry, that came before then. Oh, I've got this other story. Sorry, that came after that. Don't worry about what order you tell us things. If you've written some notes, you just go through your notes. We'll write it all down. And then it's our job to put it all back into some kind of sense. So please don't worry if you're thinking, I've just had a bit of a brain dump of all the stuff that was important, all the stories that we loved. it really is our job to put that into some kind of order. And you would be amazed how much we can get into 10 minutes just by condensing those stories, but getting all of the colour and the themes in it.
Yeah, definitely. And for me, I have the way I would always put something together. So if I've got to prepare a speech, or if I'm going to deliver something to any audience of any kind, I take notes on top of notes. So if I'm driving, sometimes I'm driving to work and a thought will pop into my mind of what I want to say. So I'll quickly make a voice note of it and save it on my phone, come back to it later. I think sometimes for families, if they're out and about, and they are going through this and they're trying to write a eulogy, rather than, make sure that they do make these notes and just keep them saved. And that helps in the long run as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And don't worry about handing us scratty bits of paper from 20 different people with all different stories. And actually, I really love that, where it's a bit of a jigsaw puzzle, working out which comment is from who and who said something completely different to somebody else, and trying to piece it all together. We're a little bit like researchers or detectives in a way to unpick somebody's story. And it's a really exciting part of the job. So yeah, don't worry if it all feels like it doesn't make sense. The one final thing I would just say in writing any eulogy or any part of a story is just think about, so what? Why am I telling people this? What does it show about my loved one's life? What's the colour? What's the point? What's the purpose of me saying that about their life? Is that a good thing that I want to highlight? Is it one of their little quirks? But just really all the time, is it relevant? Is it true? Does it have a point in the story? So I think that pretty much wraps up what we wanted to talk about in writing killer eulogies. So just to remind you, the 5 things we advise you to think about if you're going to write your own eulogy or you're preparing for a loved one is put together that timeline of significant events, the skeleton of somebody's life, the chronology of the big important moments. Think about the passions, the hobbies, the interests. When that person was absolutely at their happiest, what were they doing? What really mattered to them in life? What were the causes or the values or the charities that they really, really believed in and were passionate about? What did you learn from them? Why was the world a better place for them being in it? And what have they left you with? And what were they most proud of in their life? What are the things that if they were sitting back and looking back over their life, they'd be thinking, I just can't believe I achieved that in my lifetime. And it might be making the best brew in Yorkshire. It might be putting a rocket on the moon, and both are equally valid in a life story. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of inspiration and thought around putting eulogies together. But of course, if you need any more help with that at all, you know where Carl and I are, and we will be very happy to answer any of your questions.
Okay, so we're going to go into our question of the week, and this is one that has come up quite a couple of times actually, where people have been asking us, what's the difference in putting together a graveside service as opposed to putting a service together in a church or at a crematorium? So over to you, Nicola, on this one to start.
Oh, good question, Carl. So thank you to whoever sent that one in for us. And there's probably 2 different services that we have around a graveside. So the first one being just the committal after the crematorium or the church. And that's a very short final farewell where we commit somebody's body. But I think this question probably refers to a full graveside service. So the whole shebang at the graveside, no crematorium, no church beforehand. And there's a lot that's very similar, but actually there's definitely some considerations to think about before you go ahead with that. So you will be standing up for the whole of the service. So if you want that to be 20 minutes, half an hour, that's quite a long time to ask people to stand. And do you have any family members who struggle with mobility? Would they need seats to be brought in? Should we shorten the service for them? So it's just not quite as comfortable. If you get caught short and need the loo in the middle of a graveside service, there's not often somewhere to go. So again, that can be a consideration. The great British weather isn't always predictable. So if it's absolutely hoying down, do we want to stand there still with umbrellas and deliver that whole service there while everyone's cold and wet? And also there's just things around celebrants, officiants will have microphones, speakers, we'll have phones that we can play music from. So you can do a lot of the things that you can in a crematorium. But we're then juggling a service book to read our script from, a microphone to speak into, a phone to play music off, and all of those things. We can put some things on a stand, and the choreography is just a little bit more challenging. If you want people to speak, where do they speak from? You're all a little bit more dispersed. People don't want to stand on graves, so it's a little bit more awkward knowing where to stand. So those are some of the things to think about, but there are some benefits in that you don't have as many time constraints, so we have a little bit longer if you want it. And they can be really, really beautiful on a summer's day with a natural bird song or the wind rustling in the trees. It's really gorgeous to have an outside service, but it can be a little bit more complicated. So I think the biggest thing for me would just be to think about, do you really want people standing up for that long? And actually, if you want to condense the service, what are the really, really important parts that you want to put into it?
And I think that's beautifully answered, Nicola. And obviously with this episode, we've just been talking about writing eulogies. And again, if we're going to be doing this outside and we do condense the service, then we've got to make that eulogy just that little bit shorter. And all those points you made are all absolutely spot on.
And is there anything else logistically from a funeral director's perspective that you would need to think about?
So I think for me, there are a couple of points, because when we do a graveside service, depending on your minister will ultimately depend on how they would like the service to a degree to run. So some ministers and vicars would like the coffin lowering straight away, or some would like the coffin to stay above ground until the whole service has taken place. Now again, that's a chat and a conversation you have to have with the minister before we start. But logistically for us, it's not a problem, either way, whether we're in a church, at a crematorium, or by the graveside. We're happy to do either or. And again, I know you mentioned, so sometimes, in the winter, people think it's a bad idea, but sometimes there's nothing better than a nice crisp morning, outside. It is a bit fresh, of course, but, sometimes it is quite beautiful to do.
Absolutely, as long as the ground isn't too frozen to actually dig a grave in the first place, which has been an issue a few times before. But just picking up on a point you made there, Carl, I think what we've tried to get through in this podcast time and time again, so hopefully this is ringing true with all of you, is that we can do whatever you want us to do. There are always options. There might be implications or consequences of those options. We might have to think a little bit harder about how we get around things. But there's very little that we're not able to do if you're just honest with us and tell us what you'd like for your service. So we are always there to help.
Okay, Nicola, and then just to wrap up this episode completely, we're going to do our usual fondest funeral moments. So for me, one of my fondest funeral moments is that this job I've been doing for so long, I still put my all into every funeral service. So no matter who the family are, I always give them 110%, and I always want to make that family think that that's the only funeral that I'm looking after, so they've got my full undivided attention throughout the whole process from start to finish. And for me, it's nice when families come back to you and acknowledge that. So when I first started, before the social media side of things, a lot of families would put acknowledgements in the paper, but the acknowledgements would be thanking the church, the vicar, the florist, the funeral director, and would mention, the names personally. And nowadays, obviously, we've moved on and we're looking into Google reviews and all this sort of feedback. And I always think that's a real positive thing to get back as a funeral director. So as I say, it's always quite nice to receive that feedback, but it's good for the business as well, receiving any sort of feedback. But it's always good to advise families. So it's always nice for me to receive a nice Google review or even just a little card. And over to you, Nicola.
And I'm just going to pick up on that point about Google reviews, because anyone who's ever had an email from me will know there's a line in my signature that says, if you like what I do, I'd be so grateful for a review. You can leave one here. And if you click on that, you can leave me a review. And that isn't about me wanting all these great platitudes about what I've done. What I'm hoping those reviews do is give confidence to other people that they have choices and that they can have the service that they want, and that understand that other people have been in the same situation and had a really, really positive experience that's helped. And that's what we're trying to do with those reviews.
That's it. I couldn't agree more. And it gives that family the confidence to know that they're in safe hands throughout the whole process.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I'm going to wrap up this week's episode with a bit of a light-hearted, fondest funeral moment, which goes back to a time for a gentleman who was very, very funny, and his family were all very quirky, and we'd had a really good laugh putting the service together. And so it was quite informal and it was quite light-hearted. And we brought the gentleman into the crematorium, rested him on the catafalque, family all were seated, and he was a real lover of frogs. So there was a frog floral tribute that we stood up on the front of his coffin. So it was looking out at everybody during the service. And we're not long into the service before I start to hear drip, drip, drip. And it's the worst sound you can hear. If you work in the funeral industry, you'll know why. It's the worst sound you can hear. And I'm thinking, just carry on, just carry on. And then I heard drip, drip, drip. And I pressed play on the music for the reflection piece and sneaking a look at the coffin, thinking, what on earth is dripping? What's coming through the ceiling? And a gentleman on the front row just put his hand up and said, I think the frog's having a wee. And the frog floral tribute was dribbling all over the crematorium floor. And at that moment, all I could think was, thank God it's only the frog. And everybody just cracked out laughing. It was the perfect comment at the perfect time for the perfect gentleman. And it just sticks in my mind as one of those moments where you can have laughter at a funeral.
Definitely. Oh, that's brilliant.
So I think that wraps up episode 9 of Over My Dead Poddy. To remind you, the next episode that we are recording is our fast funeral cues. So fast fire funeral cues. So please do let us know anything at all that you want us to answer, and we'll get that done for you. Also, if you see Carl and I about anywhere, at a funeral, just wandering the streets, calling in a cafe for a coffee somewhere, stop us and ask us the question that you want answering, and we will get it into the show as well. Following on from that, we have our final episode of the season, episode 11, which, as we've spoken to you about, is going to be recorded live at Stockton Crematorium Open Day on Saturday, the 27th of September. That's going to be recorded between 11:30 and 12:30 in the Bluebell Chapel. So if you want to come down, please do come and join us there, or let us have your question beforehand. We'll also just be having a chat about the whole podcast series and what we've got from it, and more importantly, what we're hoping to bring out in series 2. So thank you so much for listening. It's great to have you tuning in again. Hopefully you're all away now to open a bottle of wine and start writing your own killer life story. And we can't wait to hear them.
Thanks for listening, guys.
See you on the next show.
Thank you for listening, and we really hope you enjoyed and were inspired by this week's episode. Remember that you can get in touch with us anytime to ask a question, offer to be a guest, or to request that we bust a particular myth. You can get in touch via any of our social accounts over My Dead Poddy on Facebook, Insta, or TikTok. Or you can drop us an email at overmydeadpoddy@gmail.com. Just a reminder that whilst all of us work in the funeral industry, none of us are fully qualified grief counsellors. And therefore, if you've been affected by any of the issues that we've discussed today, we highly recommend that you seek out professional or medical support to help you with those conversations. Should you need any support, please do get in touch and we can hopefully signpost you in the right direction, but we can't offer those services ourselves. Thanks for listening, and we can't wait to bring you the next episode.